Welcome to Leadership Matters, a podcast from the Bailey Group. I'm your host, Kaylee Thomsen, president of and partner at the Bailey Group, where we believe better leaders create healthier workplace environments, healthier humans, and a better world. On this show, we explore real stories, practical insights, and honest conversations to help you lead yourself and others better. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Leadership Matters. I'm your host, Kaylee Thomsen, and today I'm joined by Summer Miller. Summer is an educator and an advisor who focuses her time, talent, and energy on people-centered change. Summer, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. People-centered change. How did you first get into this work, Summer?
I would say not really by design. I think with a lot of us, if we have been a leader or a manager for any amount of time, you're going to lead people through change, and you're going to have experienced it sometimes go well and sometimes not so well. And I think my focus on it came out of experience and necessity. So going through changes, especially in a really large company, it sometimes doesn't feel great. It feels like it's happening to you and not with you. And I, over time, just started thinking through how could we design this so that it's a good experience for people. Now, that was based on my instincts and whatever I could kind of gather from what I saw around me. But over time, I just started to study it more, to ask people, to interview people, to research it, to eventually get education that helped me to be more informed and have more grounded in principles and theories that would help. But it just started from wanting it to not go as poorly as it had and wanting to be a part of the solution.
I love that. Can you think of an example or a time that you went through a change that felt imposed upon you, maybe earlier on in your career, that really lit your passion for this people side, Summer?
Yes, and this is probably something a lot of people have gone through, but restructuring, when you figure out, like, you think you're settled and you've got your team, and in this case, I was managing a team. And I got an invitation to a meeting. It was 15 minutes long on my calendar, and that kind of freaks people out.
Yes.
And I jumped on the call, and they said, we're going to restructure. You're going to cover a different territory. Your boss is no longer going to have a job. And we don't know what's happening with your team, but we'll find a place for them. So it was a big shuffle, and there wasn't much notice. And even right after our call, they were going to have a call to introduce it to everybody. But without having answers, without having clarity. And it was a scary situation. I was barely ahead of them on what was happening, and I had all kinds of gaps. And I didn't really know how to support my team through that because I had no answers. And I also felt kind of insecure and nervous about it because I had a great leader, and she was no longer going to be in that seat, and I didn't know, was she going to have a job? So it was all of these question marks. And of course, when that happens, you start to make up stories, and you have the internal freak out. And I think that was probably the first really bad experience I had. And my natural instinct as a leader was, how can I make this feel okay for the people I lead when I have a whole lot of nothing to work from? It felt like I just had no details, but I still needed to lead them as best I could.
So what did that look like for you in that season, given the constraints that were present?
It was a lot of me being proactive to do things that I wasn't maybe told to do. So in this case, I was going to take on a new territory and a team. So it was making sure I understood the lay of the land so that I could care for those people well and not come in and bulldoze over anything. But I also didn't want to leave something in shambles. And I had a whole team of people that were all over the country, feeling kind of alone and without answers and not knowing who their team or their boss would be. So I spent one-on-one time with those folks until they had a new place to land. I didn't have to do that, but I recognized that I needed to fill that gap so that they weren't left to spin in their own mind, right? And to worry. And even though I didn't have the answers, just being present with people and listening and trying to support but not fix, that matters. So that's what I did because I had nothing else I could do. and then just transitioning them well to the next person once we knew what that was.
Looking back now, what would have made the biggest difference in that transition from the company at that time?
I think maybe purposeful timing and sequence of events. And I don't think they should have given me all the details. And that's because when there's organizational changes, there's sometimes good reasons why those need to be held close. I'm not going to pretend everything should just be dumped out on the table. Sometimes it can't be. But I would say having conversations with people at different levels to help them prepare for those calls that were about to happen or the changes. So for example, they knew I was going to take on a new territory. They knew I was going to probably have a new boss and a new team. That's great for me to know, but they could have also maybe figured out what was happening with my team before that discussion happened. And sometimes we're moving so quickly, we're trying to be efficient, but we skip steps. So I think pausing to say who needs to know what, in what sequence, how equipped are our leaders to have these conversations and to navigate ambiguity. If you are looking at the people involved and how ready they are to do certain things, you can bridge those gaps in the way that you plan change. And that's really planning the human side of change, not the mechanics of we need to do X, Y, and Z, but it's really how do people navigate this well. That's change leadership more than change management.
I know you went on later to influence more of the change making process. Can you talk about one of those earlier experiences where you're now involved in this change management and what felt most important to you to influence in that process?
I would say the biggest thing is coming out, and I moved here to Minneapolis, and I was involved in a lot of bigger changes, so far beyond my team, but thinking about the company as a whole. And some of that you do have to focus on the process and the mechanics, the plan that you execute. What I really enjoyed about that experiences was focusing on the change leadership aspect. So in all of the planning, being mindful of the needs of humans. How do humans grow well? Because when you're changing, you are growing. They go together. So what do we need to grow well? And how do we design the conditions for that in parallel with all of this other stuff that's happening? And a big piece is the individual. What does one human need to grow well? But also, what do leaders need to guide that growth? And that's often a big gap for leaders in business. They're so busy running the business that it can be hard to care for the individuals and the teams. And so part of what we did was we created tools that they could use. So not just checklists, but conversation guides. We had calls with leaders to teach them change leadership principles. We help them understand what the human brain needs to grow well so they could build that muscle and start to apply that in leadership in general. And by the way, we're changing now, so let's apply it here. But I think that was one of the most rewarding things was to be a part of architecting how we did both the people side and the process side so that we didn't have as many gaps. And nothing's perfect, but I think at a minimum that shows people that they matter, that this is about humans growing. It's not just about a business growing.
You talked about the conditions for the human brain to grow. Can you share some of those conditions with us now, Summer?
I'd say sometimes I frame it when it comes to change, it's around how do you help people feel safe to grow and to minimize self-protection. Because often when we're facing a change, you can see what looks like resistance and you could think, oh, this person just doesn't want to change for whatever reason. And we make up those reasons. Often when people are facing a change or just any kind of growth and it doesn't feel safe to move forward, we put up our guard. We self-protect, and that can look a lot of different ways. And the brain is wired to do that. It keeps us safe in life, in day-to-day experiences, and it does at work too. So we're designing to help people grow well. We're designing to minimize the threats people might feel. So there's some basic ways that I help people think that through because I don't want to overcomplicate it. I think if you nurture 3 types of connection, you can create those conditions. And so we focus on an intellectual connection. So do people have the clarity and the focus they need? And this is like a two-way connection. So not just we're going to give you information about the change, but we're going to connect and make sure you know where we're going and where to put your energy. And then the second type of connection is emotional. So that is feeling motivated and believing that it's worthwhile. And you have to nurture that too, because people don't start there. And then having a relational connection where people have the trust and the safety to be able to take steps forward with other people. So if you're nurturing those three types of connection, you're creating the conditions the brain needs to feel safe. That doesn't feel efficient. And so it often gets skipped. But I think that if you even just look at little ways to influence that, like instead of one-way communication, we're going to have two-way. And instead of giving answers, I'm going to listen and be curious. It could just be little practices that leaders apply that help them to deepen those connections and to help the brain light up positively, or at least with less guard.
I love how you talk about how it's not the most efficient way, and so often we can skip some of these steps. Which of those three connections are most likely to get overlooked, Summer, in your experience?
I would say emotional is. It probably depends on the leader, so maybe I'll back up a little bit. But for me, it's emotional because I'm a very logical, rational person. And so when I started off as a leader, I was like, I didn't say this out loud, but in my mind, I was thinking, it's your job, right? It's your job. We're going to change. Everybody should just get on board because it's what we're paid to do. That's the logical side of who I am. Over time, I had a great mentor, and he talked to me about control versus influence. And as much as I wanted to control the outcomes and the behaviors by just saying, here's what we do and here's why, and go do it, he said, what would it look like to influence this person who's showing resistance? And that transformed the way I thought about emotional connection, because then I realized people might intellectually know what we're doing. Maybe they even understand it. They don't like it or feel good about it, though. If we don't feel safe or good or positive about something, that's enough to stop us or to cause enough tension that we can't move forward confidently. And the best way to help people engage emotionally is to let them put their fingerprints on what's happening. They need to be a part of it and feel like it's happening with them and not to them. So I think that that's the piece that gets missed most often, is we're moving so fast that we're not thinking about the need humans have to have autonomy and to have a voice, right? If you can create those spaces for people to participate in a change, they're more likely to get to the point where they believe it's worth it. Even if it's not all the things they would have designed themselves, if you believe something is worthwhile, you can push through the hard things.
Yeah, that's really well said. I really appreciate your comments about that desire to control and recognizing the importance of influence over control. Was there a moment in your leadership journey where you felt like you continued to try to rely on the logic, the intellectual knowledge, and dial up that piece and found, man, I am really getting stuck here. I am really not effectively communicating, that helped you embrace that emotional side?
Yeah, I'll talk about what led up to that conversation with my mentor, because that was my learning things the hard way moment. But a lot of people might have been through this, but I was leading a team and they were moving from hourly time reporting, or they were actually moving from salary to hourly. And it was labor law related. So it wasn't a choice that I made or that the company made because we were like, let's do this. It sounds like a good thing. It was, we need to be in compliance. We need to make sure people are paid appropriately, all of those things. So when a change like that happens, there's often a more of a process way of thinking about it because you're trying to be compliant, right? So you're thinking through, why are we doing this? When is it effective? What are the tools and resources? And those are the things that often get communicated. So that's kind of where it started. We have this change. Here's the talking points. We have a frequently asked questions document. And we ran everyone through all of the things that were coming, right? And think of this as one-way communication with maybe a little bit of Q&A at the end, right? And that felt kind of like one and done. We talked about it. Everybody knows, effective this date, we're all going to be golden, right? We're going to know what we're doing. And a lot of people will do something like that out of, I talk about different types of commitment, but so duty and compliance-based commitment. I will do it because I should or because I have to. And those are default modes for us from a commitment perspective. Most of us do a lot of things from that perspective. I should or I have to. And I had one person on my team that just wrestled with this change. And it didn't matter how much she understood it intellectually, she couldn't get behind it. And so she would do it, but it was a fight. And it was something that, like, she couldn't just do it without voicing the disapproval or the disagreement. And that was causing tension for her and for the team. And this is a really common thing. And you could look at that on the surface and say, well, this person's just resistant. And you can make up your reasons why. And that's what led me to talk with that mentor to say, I've said it every way I can say it. I have gone through the frequently asked questions and I've answered her questions and she still just won't get on board. And that's when he said, have you thought about what it would look like to influence this instead of control it? So I was pushing her down a path instead of understanding what the barriers were. When we got to talking about the barriers, and this is after me doing some reading of books and like trying to upskill myself, I decided I was just going to ask her what the change represented to her, which I probably should ask to begin with. And she had said, it's not really about the tracking. It's not about that. It's that I used to be able to deliver a certain level of service and be available a certain amount of time to the people that I serve. And now I'm limited in the hours in which I can do that. And that doesn't feel good. It feels like I'm failing every day.
Wow.
That's a completely different thing to help someone through, right? Then I don't want to track my time. And I would never have gotten there if I weren't curious and if I didn't open it up to hear her perspective. You can bet I've thought about that any kind of change differently since then, because I realize how powerful it is to ask questions and to understand what the starting point is someone's coming from.
How did knowing that starting point and that barrier for her influence your path forward, Summer?
I'd say it helped me to understand that there's no broad brush solution or one size fits all. That understanding that starting point for her, I realized, okay, this may never feel great for her because I can't solve all of those issues, but I could involve her in how we move from this starting point. And she probably has some ideas that would make this more digestible and maybe even something that feels she's connected to and feels supportive of over time. We just have to redefine this together. So co-creating a solution versus passing one down. And that is sometimes hard because we think we know best, maybe from our experience, but I would never come to the solutions that she would because I think differently. And I'm not motivated and driven in the same ways that she is. So together we were able to say, well, let's try some things. Let's test and learn. What do you think would help this to feel like you are delivering to the experience you want to? Is there anything I can remove that's a barrier? What can the team do? And I had to be careful because you can't just give people free rein sometimes. There are guidelines in a business, but I could say within these parameters, here's where we have freedom. What do you want to do with that freedom? And let's come back and make sure this is landing where it needs to. When do you think we should do that? And if it's not landing or something's not working, let's tweak it together. So I think a lot of it is this idea of co-creating, the putting the fingerprints on it. And it doesn't mean that person's going to love everything, but it makes such a difference if you feel like you're in the driver's seat. And it doesn't take a lot for us to create those moments for people, even in small ways.
It gets back to your point about how as humans, we often crave autonomy. And so you can find moments or areas where you can create some of that in this co-creation process.
And it can even be tiny things. Sometimes it's help us think through how we might tweak this process. Or it could be, this is the target. We want you to figure out your path to getting there. Because so often we give people prescriptive solutions. We're trying to get to this number, and here is the way to get there. It's a way, but it may not be the only way. So if you can open it up so people have some freedom to create that path or co-create it or create it with guidance, that's huge for people to feel like they're a part of building something. Because who wants to to grow without being a part of how that happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's inviting people into that growth process versus forcing the growth on
Mhm.
them. As you were working to upskill yourself, as you called it, were there resources that you think back to that were invaluable to you at that time?
I think it's a blend of having mentors, reading books. I did go on to get a lot of higher ed because I'm a little nerdy like that, and I never stopped learning. So I would say the academic track was more of my starting point. So I went on to get a master's that was focused on communication and organizational development, which is a lot of focus on how you guide end-to-end change and growth with people. I ended up working on my doctorate. So I finished that, and that's in organizational leadership with an org development focus. But the total focus of my research is on change commitment and change communication. So those are the academic routes. And then I'd say one of the books I read, which is pretty early on, around the time I was working through my hard lesson, I read the book Switch: How to Change Things When Change is Hard by Chip and Dan Heath. That was a really great one because it was a very simple way to frame the gap I was facing.
Yeah.
Because if you've read that book, it talks about the elephant and the rider and the path, right? And I was completely speaking to the rider, so that's the logic, right? Here's what to do, here's where we're going. I was not concerned at all with how do we feel about moving forward,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I had to learn how to care about that in an authentic way.
As you were learning more about people and influence and co-creation, how, if at all, did this influence your parenting journey?
I think in some pretty substantial ways. And I'll say, like, all of the things that I teach and use with businesses or I teach at university, they all apply to the human experience because we're talking about how people grow well. That is far beyond what you do in business, right? And at home, that has been interesting because we have a very highly neurodivergent household. And that means everybody needs a little bit of something different. And all humans do anyway, but it's just amplified in our home. And we've had experiences where it would have been easy for my husband and I to just make decisions. Kind of like in business. We make a decision, we tell you what it is, and you do it, right? I have a lot of practice in business helping people to have a voice and to participate. And so at home, we've naturally just tried to do that more. So, for example, we had to change schools for our son and our daughter. And this is partly related to just changing schools because they were ready to go to high school, partly also because they have different learning needs and they have some sensory needs. And so you can't just put them in any space. And that would have been something we could have researched and figured out and just told them, here's where you're going. But it helped for us to involve them in that, to say, the aim is to get to a school that will get you to this point. Where we have freedom is in choosing this school as long as it's within these parameters. And let's research it together. What's important to you? This is important to us. So it's a co-created solution. And both of my kids ended up at an online charter high school, which is not what I would have chosen right off the bat. But it had the things that they needed to thrive and to manage both the academics, but also the sensory needs they had. And it presented some gaps, like in terms of friends and relationships. And so they also got to be a part of helping solve for that. This is not present in this experience, and that's a concern for Dad and I. How do you think that we can make sure that you have relational connections with people? And so for them, that was being involved in youth group through church and having regular, like, one-on-one dates with a best friend, or just finding ways to do it. So everything I'm talking about there, though, is the same thing I teach businesses. It's just on a smaller scale.
It's interesting, too, because then you're developing the capabilities, just as we talk about with leaders and their teams, and you're growing humans as they're developing and growing.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of us would, if you could take what you've learned in business and apply it through all the things you've ever done as a parent, as a friend, as a partner, it's amazing how much better I think we might do stuff knowing what you know now, right? And I think that the real blessing is I'm able to take this stuff and use it with my family. I wish I could, like, rewind sometimes and use it with other experiences I've had 20 years back, but nothing is wasted. I'm here and I know what I know because of those experiences.
Mm.
So,
And so much of the time, I don't know if this resonates with you or not, but I've found the most important lessons in life are learned through those hard seasons that, of course, we'd love to go back and do differently, and yet we wouldn't be the humans that came out the other side of that.
yeah, I use that phrase, nothing is wasted, quite a bit because you can look back and say, oh, this was a total miss. This was a failure. We can get real hung up on grieving the loss of what might have been.
Mhm.
And there's so many things. If you just think about jobs you didn't get that you really, really wanted, but that not getting that caused you to reimagine the future.
Mhm.
And I think that that's a lot of what I've experienced over time. Like I've had things that I wanted so badly, and it was my design for my life, and it just didn't shake out the way I thought it would.
Yeah.
And it opened up amazing opportunities that I might have been too scared to pursue otherwise.
Can you talk about one of those amazing opportunities that opened its door to you?
Yeah, I would say I have. Well, I talked about my higher education, and I probably wouldn't have just pursued that just because. I was in a role where I was doing good work, but it wasn't the right mix of work to challenge my brain. I loved my team, but there was just something missing. And I had applied for another role and didn't get it. And I thought, I'm ready for this, but I didn't get it. And it was one of those things where I could have just kind of sat in that space and felt, discouraged or bitter or all the things, right? I felt like I was at a dead end, and I totally wasn't. But you know how sometimes you're in it
Absolutely.
and you feel like it's all consuming and this is all you can see what's right in front of you. But that's what prompted me to start looking at outside opportunities to learn, not with the intention of leaving my company, but just to say, I need something to grab hold of. I need a way to engage my brain. It's not happening in my job in the way I need for it to. But that's kind of what started me on the path of going back to get my master's degree. And eventually, there's a lot of other stories that are similar to that, but it pushed me in an academic direction. And I think I needed that to learn stuff that I never would learn in the seat that I was in.
Yeah.
Because I was with the same company in the same industry for over 20 years.
Yeah.
So you can be in a bubble, right? And I needed to get outside of it
Mm.
to learn more, but also to recognize the value I could offer in other spaces.
Yeah. Incredible. And now you're an educator.
Yeah. I would say in hindsight, that's the through line. I've always been an educator. It's sat in a lot of different job titles.
Mm.
And I think just titles in life. But I'm a person who builds capability. It doesn't matter where I'm at. It doesn't matter what my job is. It doesn't matter if it's in business or academia. I want to help people build capability so they can do great things. And a lot of times help them put a name to what they're doing or a structure around it because people aren't starting from scratch. So when I'm teaching courses now, I teach mostly graduate courses at a couple universities, and almost all my students work full time. They're successful professionals going back to get a master's degree, and they're all so capable, but they often are used to being the person who gives the answers
Mm.
and the person who has the wisdom, the well earned wisdom. And I am usually teaching them how to guide people to find the solutions rather than giving the answers, which is such a rewarding thing to help people do. And it's often, like I said, they're not starting from scratch. They know how to do a lot of what I'm teaching them. They just don't know maybe how to wrap their head around all of it or how to structure it so it's repeatable. And I love helping people kind of figure that out and self-identify how much they already know and how they just needed a little bit to piece it together. And I think that I've done that all the jobs that I've had. I just loved seeing people grow and being a part of helping them do that in a way that's meaningful and connected. So educator is kind of the core of who I am. It just lives in a lot of different spaces.
Yeah. That challenge that you talk about of going from being the problem solver to helping develop others who can solve the problems. What makes that such a challenge for us humans?
I think that it's connected to what people value and also how we identify as humans. So if you think about the career movement we usually have, we move in a vertical line, at least a lot of us do, and you go on to the next level, and then people expect you to know more and they come to you for answers. And we become really good at giving answers based on our experience. Usually those are flawed because we're missing context. Because if you're answering questions without understanding the true problem, you're hoping it hits, but it often does not, right? So I think that that's a really normal thing for people in any discipline, whether you're in sales or marketing or HR, it doesn't matter. Whatever work you do, you build expertise over time. You develop this crystallized intelligence, this wisdom, and that is valued a lot of times in the marketplace, but it's also how we start to think about our value. It's more performative, right? I'm valuable because I deliver this, or I know this, or I've got this title. So that's more the expert seat, and that becomes elevated in our mind and even in our culture. And it is sometimes really hard for us to step back and to realize that there are other pathways to get to the end, or that we are adding more value to a business if we help people to build that capability of getting to the answer. Um, and it's also something that sometimes challenges our sense of identity, because it might take away that expert hat you've been wearing, and now you're the guide. And we have to reconcile that to say, am I still adding value? It's different, but is it still the right value for the business or the family or whomever, if I just shift my focus to being a guide versus an expert? It's a hard thing, and it takes some discipline when you first start doing it, because I still, even after many years, I want to give the answers.
Yeah.
Because it's, you want to share the things you've learned, but you have to hold back sometimes and let other people get there, like build on what they already know, and then you can help to guide as needed if they are missing some pieces.
Yeah. What have you found most helpful to help people who logically understand the value of this transition, but struggle actually embracing the behaviors that lead them to go from being the problem solver to developing the problem solvers?
I think that sometimes you have to appeal to the rational side of them, or kind of the risk side. So what I mean by that is just the idea that if you give the answer and you're wrong, what's the risk? Because people usually can understand that piece. So for example, if somebody says, we're having this significant problem with a customer, and you don't actually understand the problem, you just know the presenting problem, and you try to solve that in the wrong way, what does that do for the customer? And that could be anything, right? It could be any scenario, but I even just saying, can you tolerate the risk of being wrong? And can you afford to let other people do that too? So it's just saying, it's not rocket science. It's just understand what problem you're trying to solve. That doesn't take a lot of work. It's just asking questions. Kind of the what's happening? Why does that seem like the problem? What have you looked into already? What might be behind what you're seeing? It's some basic questions that can help you dig down and understand what's the starting point of this problem, and can we solve for that? And oftentimes you don't actually know how to do it all yourself. It doesn't live in one person's brain how to solve all the problems. It's the collective, right? So I don't know that it's easy, but I think when we understand the risk we're taking or the damage we might be doing by giving quick answers or solution jumping, I think that it helps us to realize we're doing people a disservice when we don't dig in.
Summer, if leading people is ultimately about helping humans grow, which I love, what have the people that you've led taught you about being human?
I think one of the biggest things and hardest things for me is how important it is to be vulnerable and to create spaces where other people can be vulnerable. Because in business, we tend to be more guarded and we protect ourselves. And we do that often for good reason. There's always stuff that's happened in our life that tells us something is safe or unsafe. And you have to create conditions for people to be vulnerable. But I think a lot of times as leaders, you start by doing it yourself. And it doesn't mean that you have to share every little thing, but even small things where people realize you're human, you've made mistakes, you're learning and growing all the time. When they realize that as a leader, I'm able to do that and show up in that way, they feel freer to share the things they're experiencing, the good and the bad. And I've learned that by watching people that I've led and seeing kind of what creates a team dynamic that works well. What is it they're doing that makes this work or not work? Because sometimes you learn from things that aren't happening, right? Not just what is happening. So vulnerability, I think, is the main thing that my teams have taught me and individuals have taught me. And it's something that I have to keep practicing because it's a risk, right? Every day you're choosing to trust people with things that are, that you might want to protect and hold tight. So being willing to keep doing that because I know it matters.
I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And thank you for being here today. It's been such a joy and pleasure chatting with you. And I really appreciate this passion for building capacity and capability in those around you.
Well, thanks. It's been fun. You've got some great questions. So it got me thinking some more as well.
And thank you to our listeners. Join us next week for another episode of Leadership Matters. Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Leadership Matters. If today's episode resonated with you, would you do me a favor and share it with someone you care about? To learn more about the work the Bailey Group is doing in the world, check us out at thebaileygroup.com or follow us over on LinkedIn. We love sharing useful articles, helpful resources, and valuable tools to help you expand your leadership capacity. Like and subscribe, and join us next time for more honest conversations.